it is a potentially unprecedented rebellion. We have seen an extraordinary first year for Keir Starmer, in which he's gone from really a very heady high to kind of astonishing fall. And I think that is one of the reasons why this is almost causing excitement, if that's the word, or interest, which is they can't make another mistake. It can't go wrong again. Politically, he's very ruthless. And in fact, I even said to him once, "You've been ruthless." And he immediately said, "Yeah, because I had to."
Anushka Asthana, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, I guess now I'm the US editor for Channel 4 News, but I have spent pretty much 20 years reporting on Westminster in the UK, so it's a big change.
And being really in the heart of it, you know, I mean, we're coming up actually to a crucial vote next week on PIP payments, and that's a story that you've followed and been in the middle of, actually, in the midst of for the last few months. You interviewed Angela Rayner yesterday, and there was this conversation that you were having about Starmer and whether this is a vote of confidence in him. Is that how you see it playing out?
Well, what I think is it is a potentially unprecedented rebellion, because it is a amendment that's gone down on second reading, which is basically second reading is saying we're going to let this bill pass so that we can debate it. And a reasoned amendment, which this is on second reading, kills it dead before you even debate it. And actually, you know, I've just finished working for ITV and the Peston programme, where I've done data for many years, and we looked back at previous rebellions to try and work out, had anyone ever tried to kill a bill at reasoned amendment based on a backbench rebellion? And I had to go back to 1986.
Wow.
I know, and it was Margaret Thatcher and it was Sunday trading laws, so quite different.
Really?
Yeah, it doesn't happen, even though, you know, there have been big rebellions. Only one that would be bigger than this if 126 actually voted against Keir Starmer, which was Tony Blair on the Iraq War. They were not trying to kill the bill before it had even been debated. So to that extent, I think it is a massive, you know, kind of threat to his confidence in a way. But no, it's not officially a confidence vote, in that it's not going to actually bring the government down.
And I think possibly sometimes we can get lost in the hysteria because we've had successive administrations that have fallen apart, some of them faster than others. Do you think that maybe some of this confidence vote that is being, the sort of euphoria and excitement by the press that has been whipped up around it, do you think that is because we're almost stuck in that way of thinking, that there must always be an explosion?
I mean, there are always explosions, aren't there, in Westminster? It's one of those weird jobs where every week I'm like, sorry, this is a really hectic week, but every week's a hectic week. But I also think we have seen an extraordinary first year for Keir Starmer, in which he's gone from really a very heady high to a kind of astonishing fall. And I think that is one of the reasons why this is almost causing excitement, if that's the word, or interest, which is they can't make another mistake. It can't go wrong again. And it's just sort of amazing for 126 Labour MPs to think it's okay to sign up to a reasoned amendment. That is how upset they are about this. You speak to the whips, whose job it is to pull all the MPs into order, and they're saying to me, we've been warning about this for weeks. Downing Street knew this was coming. So, we always get a bit overexcited, don't we, in Westminster, but I also think it is quite a big deal.
Where do you think that reticence to sort of to bend or wane a little bit on the bill is coming from? I mean, you know, your book, which we are talking about, is taken as read, and you have been tracking various Labour leaders. And I think that the sort of mood of conversation at the moment is we're talking a lot about Morgan McSweeney, who is sort of seen almost as the power, or in some cases a puppeteer behind Keir Starmer. And do you think that his politics are influencing what we're seeing play out at the moment?
I mean, definitely, yes. So I researched Morgan McSweeney in great detail for my book, going back to his times in Brixton, his karaoke days, trying to work out what he was singing. You know, some amazing stories about him over the years, his time in Barking, taking on the BNP, and trying to understand who is this guy who's become the chief of staff in Downing Street. And just on one thing that he feels really passionate about, he feels really passionate about Labour responding to what Labour voters want and not what Labour members want. And so he has constantly been trying to pull the party away from the left, particularly taking on Jeremy Corbyn with some quite, aggressive tactics. I mean, not physically aggressive, but in political terms, aggressive tactics, and moving it towards what he sees as what voters want. And I've heard that Morgan McSweeney has said to people behind the scenes that welfare is an issue on which there is that biggest gap between Labour members and Labour voters. So he is obviously convinced that Labour voters are really pro-welfare cuts and therefore that they have to fight this issue. By the time this comes out, they'll almost certainly have put concessions in place because nobody can get through a potential rebellion that big. But that is why they have been reticent to do it, because they believe that voters want this and it's the right place to be, and they believe that they need to get the money for the Treasury through these means rather than raising taxes, which they think would be really unpopular with voters. The one thing to say on this, it's not only MPs who are angry about this. I went on a little road trip up the northeast of England recently for ITV News when I was still there, to talk about this issue and to talk to some of the MPs who were thinking about voting against. And one thing that's interesting is that personal independence payments, the disability benefit, are not spread evenly around the country. There are places where loads more people are on these benefits than elsewhere. And in the top 10 areas, they're all Labour-held seats. They're all kind of red wall areas. You have to go to number 11 to get a non-Labour seat. And interestingly, it's Nigel Farage's Clacton. And I went up from Hartlepool to Easington and then up to Sunderland South. And what was interesting is these are like old industrial areas. Industry has died. Jobs have gone missing. People are quite ill as a result of the work they did, perhaps, down coal mines in years gone by. And many of them are on PIP. And everywhere I looked, I was finding people who were really upset about these reforms, but who were the same sort of people who Morgan McSweeney probably thinks might appeal, this might appeal to. They were people who were angry about immigration and angry about small boats, but they didn't want these reforms to come into place. And it did make me wonder if actually they've got this wrong in terms of what the public want, particularly in some of their important areas. In fact, the MP in Hartlepool said to me when we were up there that there'd been a by-election for a council seat which Labour had held forever and they lost it to Reform. And the reason he was going to rebel on welfare was that was the number one issue that came up on the doorstep.
That's really interesting, isn't it? But do you think it's perhaps maybe a one-size-fits-all mantra that doesn't quite work? Because I think one thing that Nigel Farage is very good at doing, so on your data, actually looking around the country at these Labour-held seats, if you look at coastal towns at the last election, in many of those coastal towns, I think it's like 6 out of 10, Reform came second in all of those seats, which is extraordinary because if you think, well, if the choice is between someone like Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage, who on paper you wouldn't think had too much in common, do you think that Morgan McSweeney is chasing what Reform are pushing, which is these, tax cuts, cuts to welfare and low immigration? Do you think that perhaps he's chasing it? Perhaps he's too on the Reform train?
Well, I definitely think he's worrying about Reform. He definitely sees Reform as the big threat at the next election. It's definitely true that we're talking about similar types of voters that everyone is going after, although also true that one of the ways that Reform wins when they win is actually by taking previous Tory votes, not by necessarily eating into the Labour vote. But still, there is clearly working class communities up and down the country that, Morgan McSweeney sees as his role to fight Reform UK to win them. And there are some of his MPs who feel that he has moved too far onto the Reform train, as you say, because they feel like to build the 35% you need to win an election now, which is less than it used to be, you actually need to win the left as well. And welfare reforms are going to alienate the people who maybe went Green or went Lib Dem or even went independent. I think there's this massive battle going on, and that's why today we've woken up to the headline of some people are calling for regime change for, is that right? Regime. I can never say that word right. Regime change, and Morgan McSweeney to go. I think because there is a bit of a battle for the soul of the party.
Do you think
on the
perhaps
left.
he spent too long embarking? Because do you know? I mean, it's such an organic place, right? In terms of like the fight against the BNP and how that fight was won. It's so organic compared to the rest of the country. People in that area in East London do tend to be patriotic in a way that perhaps other metropolitan areas are not. Does he perhaps see that as a blueprint for the rest of the country that may not actually be reflective?
I definitely thought when I was researching Morgan McSweeney that what happened in Barking was really important to him. And it was 2010. I was actually a reporter at The Observer at the time, and I spent a lot of time covering it. I spent a lot of time pounding those streets of Barking, watching the rise of the BNP and watching the fight back from Labour. And his theory there, which I do think he sees as a blueprint. I'm not sure if I totally agree that it's not a good one in a way. It's just whether some of these things are not working, individually, was people are really upset about things, right? They're upset that there's a load of eyesore rubbish piling up in people's front yards. And they were blaming at the time the Africans, because the BNP told them that the Africans had moved out of London into Barking and they were causing the trouble. And what Labour did in return was actually say, we need to say to people, we're going to fix the problems as you see them. So we're going to take the crap out of your garden. We're going to make it look better. They had this massive campaign called strategy called Eyesore Gardens, where they said to people who had loads of rubbish, fly tipping, etc., either you clean this up and we'll help you, or we're going to charge you for it. And so the basic theory was fix people's problems and they'll stop blaming the immigrants for all of this and they'll stop voting BNP and they'll vote Labour. And it sort of worked, right? So he has this theory that if we fill people's potholes and make the NHS work better and make your life feel better day to day, then there's less reason to go to reform. And I don't think that's wrong. I think that's right. But along the way, individual policies are flooring them one by one, and they're getting things wrong. I mean, on welfare, the argument is still to be had about whether it's wrong or right, but we know they got winter fuel payments wrong, and we know that they've made other mistakes along the way.
It's so interesting. The minute that you said about cleaning up the aesthetics, I immediately thought about Keir Starmer just a few weeks ago over the bank holiday, where he said he was clearing away all of the roadworks, and that was going to free up the country, and you can all go on your bank holiday and enjoy yourself. That then that's a Morgan McSweeney.
It's the idea, but what is the reality? I went with my parents to A&E recently. They're quite elderly. We sat there for 13 hours. It was completely teeming. We didn't get seen. Every experience, and I said this repeatedly when the Conservatives were in power, every experience that an individual has like that makes it harder for them to trust the government. And so, sure, if they can make our lives better, if they can clear up the roadworks and we all get on holiday quicker and we get to see our GP quicker, then maybe they'll get voted for again. But it's a very challenging time where they're facing unbelievable pressures from every which way. They have to raise defence spending to 5%. I mean, that costs something like £80 billion. They are under pressure on loads of other fronts. And so I think the theory is great, but the reality is, as I've always said, the reality of governing is way harder than people realise. And actually, when they first got in and they'd had this really quite impressive election win, partly because the Tories collapsed, but also partly because of Morgan McSweeney's strategy, in my opinion, and then things went wrong really quickly. I would have senior Conservatives who'd worked with Rishi Sunak messaging me going almost gleeful about it. They were like, see, we told you, it's actually really hard to govern.
You did the sort of seminal interview, wasn't it? Was it just before the election or just after the election with Keir Starmer? You're sitting in an auditorium, is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Did you think when you're tracking the trajectory from that interview to now, has it panned out the way that you expected it to? Or do you not think like that as a journalist? Perhaps you don't.
Well,
you're taking it day by day because,
I'm wondering which interview you're talking about, because there was an interview which I immediately thought of when you said that, where I was with him in an auditorium, but it was at Leeds University.
Okay.
Is that the one you mean?
Yeah, quite possibly.
And we had gone back to where he went to university, and basically I'd spent 3 months following him for a documentary for ITV News. And we went back to Leeds to try and understand that's where he went to university. Who is this guy? What does he stand for? And we mocked up a a magazine that he'd written for when he was 22, and like we'd had his articles and they were really lefty, and I mean very boring and lawyerly as well, but very lefty. And I was saying to him, like, do you believe in this stuff anymore? And I was saying to him, and what I was trying to get at, and I think this is actually a problem for Keir Starmer, is that in order to win, he has done whatever he thinks is necessary. So to become Labour leader, he served Jeremy Corbyn, despite the fact that he didn't basically believe in Jeremy Corbyn's politics. You know, he wasn't on the left as far as Jeremy Corbyn was.
Do you really think that? Because it's interesting. I agree with you. I don't think that he has ever followed that strain of politics. But often in interviews I'm asked, or when I'm on panel discussions, you know, isn't he a socialist at heart? You don't see that?
Well, what I basically concluded with the update of the book after watching the first year in power is that he is the ultimate pragmatist. Mm-hmm. So, and lots of people I know are like that, by the way. Like, there isn't a really deep ideology in the way that you get with some politicians. And that helped to explain to me why it is that he can change his position, actually quite dramatically. In 2021, he was arguing passionately for increasing international aid because he said it would make us safer. And then he was happy to cut our international aid bill in half. And I was like, well, how's that right? And I don't think it's because he's a bad guy and he's, you know, was lying then or he's lying now. I think it's that he's pragmatic. So if he's persuaded to change his mind over something, he will change his mind, which also suggests that his belief in it wasn't as deep as you maybe thought when you heard him argue it the first time round. Almost a bit like Rishi Sunak in some ways. There isn't that kind of like deep driving force, but there is pragmatic. And apparently someone said to me behind the scenes what he says is, it's not that complicated what I stand for. I just want to make the country a bit better. I want people's lives to be a bit better. And it's like he comes at that from a pragmatic standpoint rather than this great driving ideology. And in fact, when people used to say to him, what's your vision? He would say, I hate that word. It's so vague. And that's how they ended up with the idea of missions. The problem with that, in my opinion, is that he was able to serve Jeremy Corbyn where, say, Rachel Reeves or Wes Streeting, who totally disagreed with Jeremy Corbyn, couldn't serve him. He was then able to become Labour leader, arguing that he was like Corbyn in a suit. Wasn't it that? Or was like socialism in a suit?
Yeah.
But then actually he did something different. And then he won the election without really laying out all the plans, the tax increases, the winter fuel. And so the problem is, even though I don't think that's because he's a bad guy, I think it's because he's pragmatic, he does what he thinks is the right thing in the moment, it means he's lost a lot of trust.
It's interesting. So he's not quite Miliband with the stone.
No.
Etching the principles into the stone.
He is not etching. And in fact, in government, you see it with Ed Miliband. That's why he gets himself into trouble. Ed Miliband really, really believes what he is saying. He's probably etching his new principles into stone.
There's an astonishing anecdote, actually, that you have in the book, well, sort of speaking to the ruthless nature of Starmer. Arguably, it could be seen as pragmatic. There's an incident with Jenny Formby. I don't suppose you can tell us about that.
So she was the General Secretary of the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, and she was very much on the left. She'd come from a union background. She was very much part of the Corbynite camp. And you know, I guess one argument for them wanting to get rid of her quickly was that she had been in charge when the anti-Semitism crisis had unfolded. But what always happens in Labour is the General Secretary gets put in the Lords. Usually they spend a little bit of time with a new leader and then they get moved on. Not for Jenny Formby. At a moment, she was actually quite ill, right? She had cancer. She'd been having chemotherapy, but she'd been coming into work every week. Sometimes people were telling me sleeping on sofas because she was really quite unwell. The first thing Keir Starmer did as Prime Minister, 20 minutes into the new role, as Labour leader, 20 minutes in, was to call her and tell her that she was leaving the party. There would be no House of Lords for her. I mean, her friends say that's not what she would have wanted anyway. And within about 5 weeks, he had put in the person who he wanted in place, David Evans, who, interestingly, had worked very closely with Morgan McSweeney many years earlier.
Mm. So do you think that was a Starmer decision? Do you think that he has the vision and the strategy to see how that would play out? Or do you think that is also... Because a lot of the conversation about Starmerism is you don't want to give Morgan McSweeney all of the credit for transforming the party. But there has been a move towards the Labour right, and a lot of this strategy does seem to fall within those parameters.
I mean, I think Morgan's been absolutely key to loads of it, but it would obviously be ridiculous to suggest that Keir Starmer had no role to play, in my opinion. So I don't buy the entire puppeteer idea. But Morgan McSweeney, from the very start, worked towards this position that he's in now. He, set up Labour, or he took over, should I say, Labour Together, an organisation which was working behind the scenes to basically oust Corbyn, or at least make sure that Corbyn, when he went, was replaced by somebody more to the right of the party. They went to an extraordinary lengths to make that happen. They got large numbers of donations. They spent a lot of money on an organisation called the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, which was actually run by another Labour aide, Imran Ahmed. They were the people who were outing all the anti-Semitism material about Corbyn, which really, really damaged him as a leader. They were working behind the scenes with MPs, and they were constantly looking for a potential leader. And he had this idea about the media. So the Canary was actually doing really, really well on the left, and it had more readers, as Morgan McSweeney told MPs, than the Times Online, I think, at that point. And he had this idea that he was going to try and kill the Canary and schmooze the Guardian. And I knew a bit about that because I was Guardian joint political editor at the time. So I was invited to a dinner by Labour Together, where they weren't quite so open with what they were doing, but, it was part of what they were trying to do. And Keir Starmer was the perfect leader for them because he both was in a position of being anti-Brexit, or enough anti-Brexit to appeal to Labour members, but also had been loyal to Corbyn. And they knew they needed that sweet spot. So to that extent, I think Morgan did kind of steer the ship. But at the same time, Keir Starmer was basically working on a similar project with his aides. And he had been, from the moment he arrived in Westminster, he had been working on things which, even if they didn't say it explicitly on the time, were all leading towards him becoming leader of the Labour Party, including touring the country, meeting all the CLPs, meeting all the unions that he needed to know. By the time they got to the race, and Lisa Nandy and Jess Phillips and others were joining the race to become leader, Keir Starmer had already done 2 years, 3 years of work towards it, all behind the scenes. So I do think it's a joint project. And I do think to some extent their politics aligned. Apparently the thing that Morgan was most taken by with Keir Starmer was he really felt very strongly about tackling crime and the scourge of crime on communities in the country. And
that's interesting. That's the aesthetics again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And it's the anti-reform stuff. It's that kind of politics. I've said this, Keir Starmer has been ruthless at every stage politically, although I should say, personally, apparently he's lovely. His friends say he's the opposite of ruthless. They say he's a totally lovely dad. Keir Starmer is the guy who's going to call you if you lose someone close to you. He's the first person on the doorstep of Neil Kinnock when he lost his beloved wife, Glenys. He's personally a kind person from what everyone tells me. But politically, he's very ruthless. And in fact, I even had said to him once, "You've been ruthless." And he immediately said, "Yeah, because I had to." So he's not apologetic about that, which means I think he could sack anyone, including Morgan McSweeney. But I do think he is extraordinarily loyal to Morgan McSweeney. And if Morgan is gone by the time this comes out, then I put my hands up. But it does look like there's a lot of pressure on him. But they are obviously very, very close.
Do you think if he were able to, do you think he would sack Angela Rayner?
I definitely think they see Angela Rayner as a problem when actually I think she can be a huge asset to them. She's been actually extraordinarily loyal in many ways. I was talking to her last night. Angela Rayner's politics would suggest to me that she's not comfortable with the welfare reforms. And obviously she takes a more emollient tone than some of the others, but she wasn't being disloyal to them when I was asking her about that. When I asked her about leaks that she's suggesting tax increases behind the scenes to raise £3 to £4 billion, she's not denying the leaks, but she basically isn't going to come out and throw any of her colleagues under the bus. But I think they know that politically she's in a different space to them. They know she's popular. They know that she's got a very good chance of winning the next leadership. And I don't think she's who Morgan McSweeney would probably want to win the next leadership, although I'm sure he is quite impressed by her. I mean, I think in terms of like the person who's gone from where she got taped calling Conservative scum and it was an absolute disaster and she was really, really unpopular, to be where she is now is really quite impressive.
Do you think that the scum moment, though, and the sort of her being papped smoking, do you think that that's sort of what the public likes about her, that she is a bit...
Well, I don't think scum went down well. And actually, someone told me about her crying on their shoulder about it because she was so, so devastated that she had made that mistake and said it and it had gone out there. And she's very careful with language now as a result of that. But I do think, like, we're all dying for authenticity, aren't we? That's what we want. That's why Nigel Farage is popular, because you look at him and he feels like he's just going to say what he thinks. And you may disagree with it, but you know what he thinks and you believe it. And the frustration for people who work for Keir Starmer is that, and I've seen this, behind the scenes, he's quite, you know, he can be really charming, he can be really funny. He doesn't really convey that as much as they would like to in public, whilst Angela Rayner does, doesn't she? I mean, she is very, very authentic. And so I think that's what people like about her. I mean, the other person who's very, very popular among MPs, I think has the most popularity among MPs, which suggests he may be working hard on them, is Wes Streeting. And I think it's amazing to speak to MPs, even on the left of the party, about Wes, because they're all very, very impressed. But obviously, should there be a future leadership campaign, the problem Wes Streeting would have is whether he's seen as too far to the right for the membership of the Labour Party.
But could Morgan pull that back, perhaps?
The thing with all of this, with all of the tactics and the strategy to try and win these things, is they cause a problem afterwards. So doing what they needed to do to win the Labour membership has caused them a problem when it comes to now trying to win what they see as the country or keep the country, because people are confused about how the same guy could say this thing then and this thing now. And the one thing I'd say about Wes Streeting is I don't think he would naturally change what he thinks. I find when you interview him, and this is what's refreshing about him and what's quite refreshing about Angela Rayner, they probably do say what they think, or they don't say it if they think that they can't. And so it would be really interesting to watch him trying to win over the Labour membership.
A touch of the Emily Thornberrys as well, which is what got her in trouble, because I suppose she would say it, even if she felt... Yeah. Even if she knew perhaps she shouldn't.
And it only takes one mistake, doesn't it? Like with the flag in whichever by-election it was, to be totally destroyed politically in the moment. I mean, I think she's made a very good comeback. But, you know, this age of social media, you just can't make mistakes in the way that you probably could have done 20 years ago.
We haven't even touched on Corbyn, and I've got to let you go. But maybe we should just sort of... I mean, you do track him in the book, so... Perhaps maybe we can just think about Donald Trump, and obviously you are going off to be Washington editor. Is that the correct title?
It's actually US editor, but
US editor.
It's based in Washington, but US meaning I have to be everywhere in the US if a story breaks.
It's extraordinary.
Political or not.
Do you think that? How do you think that Keir Starmer is faring in his relationship with Donald Trump? And I wonder what you think about Jeremy Corbyn. Had this been an alternate reality where Jeremy Corbyn was the Prime Minister, how would he have fared in those negotiations?
I think our relationship with the US would have been somewhat weaker, because Jeremy Corbyn is the one leader who probably would have done the Love Actually. You know, in the film Love Actually, the British Prime Minister, Hugh Grant, turns to the American leader and says, no, I'm not going to do that, sorry. And obviously that never really happens. But maybe it would have happened in the alternate reality where Jeremy Corbyn was Prime Minister.
Because Corbyn's in love with Martine McCutcheon.
Yeah, now I'm getting all sorts of visions in my head. I mean, Downing Street are pretty happy about the way the relationship has gone with Donald Trump. Somebody who listened into the first call Starmer made to Trump when Trump was still not president and Starmer was Prime Minister, and there'd been that assassination attempt against Donald Trump. And so Starmer was calling to say, I hope you're okay. And apparently Donald Trump was like, oh yeah, forget that. Wow, you're such a winner. You won this amazing election. Wow, that's incredible. And the thing is, he loves a winner. And so Starmer's election victory immediately made Donald Trump warm to him. He also loves Britain. Someone said to me, loves aesthetics. So he loves Keir Starmer's voice.
Right.
And, you know, they made a choice, rightly or wrongly, to go down the we're going to suck up to him a bit way. When they went out to do the trip, there was a huge amount of choreography behind the scenes to make sure that the letter from the King actually got to Keir Starmer, because everything in America has to go through a vetting process. And apparently an American official had got hold of the letter and was not going to give it to the UK officials to let Starmer have it. But Jill Cuthbertson, who is the fearsome deputy chief of staff in Downing Street, really impressive woman, apparently just walked over to the lady and said, you will do no such thing, grabbed the letter and slipped it to Keir Starmer in time. But to them, that choreography, that sucking up, it's all worth it to have that relationship, because they really believe that that relationship is so incredibly important. You know, whether or not he can then stand up to Trump when it needs be is going to be the challenge, because there are going to be times where he's going to. And there is a story that I just say in the update of the book, when Elon Musk was really, really attacking Keir Starmer at a point which he was still quite close to the president, and he was attacking Jess Phillips. And that really did cross a line for Keir Starmer. And he met with his aides behind the scenes, and apparently he said to them, I won't use the full word because I don't like to swear, but this is effing outrageous. And he did decide to come out quite hard against Elon Musk. Whether or not he would be willing to do the same about Donald Trump is yet to be seen. But so far, they've navigated that relationship, they feel, quite well.
Wow. Well, for more nuggets like that, the book's available. It'll be in the bio. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.